Hey, welcome. So today we're going to crack open the researcher's toolkit and look at something called sampling. It's this really clever idea that lets us understand what huge groups of people are thinking without actually having to talk to every single one of them. So how on earth does that work? Let's get into it.
I mean, this is the big question, right? Think about it. Political polls, trying out a new product, medical research, they're all trying to figure out the whole picture by looking at just a tiny slice of it. And sampling is the magic that makes it possible.
So an obvious question might be, why not just ask everyone? Well, because most of the time, the groups we want to study, we call them populations, are just massive. They're way too big and spread out. Trying to survey every single person in a country, for example, is called a census, and it's unbelievably expensive and takes forever to do.
Okay, I absolutely love this analogy from our source material because it just clicks. You don't have to eat an entire family-sized bag of chips to know if they're good, right? You just grab a handful. That handful is your sample, and it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the whole bag. All right, let's get the official lingo down. The population is that entire group we're interested in. It's the whole bag of chips. This could be all high school juniors in the state, every hospital in the country, or, every cat video on the internet. It's the total universe we want to understand. And that handful of chips, that's your sample. It's the small, manageable group that you actually study. And by looking closely at that sample, you can make some really smart guesses or conclusions about the entire population. The absolute key, though, is that the small group has to look a lot like the big one. Now, you can't just grab any old sample. There are two main families of sampling methods. On one hand, you have probability sampling. Think of this as the scientific gold standard, where everyone has an equal shot of being picked. On the other hand, you've got non-probability sampling, which is more of a practical, real-world toolkit for when that gold standard just isn't an option. All right, let's dive into the gold standard first. These techniques are all about two things: fairness and randomness. The whole point here is to get a sample that's like a perfect miniature version of the entire population. That way, we can be really confident that what we find in the sample is true for the whole group. One really powerful tool here is stratified random sampling. Okay, stick with the food analogy. Imagine your population is a big bowl of trail mix. Instead of just grabbing a random handful, you first sort everything into little piles. The peanuts, the raisins, the M&Ms. Those piles are your strata. Then you take a random sample from each pile. This way, you guarantee you get a bit of everything in your final mix. And check this out. Here's a perfect real-world example. Say you're studying 2,600 healthcare workers. You can see that nurses make up a huge chunk of that group, 84%. So when you create a proportional sample of 650 people, you make sure that 84% of your sample is also nurses. This is so powerful because it makes sure that even the smallest groups, like the physiotherapists at only 2%, are still represented exactly right. Okay, another tool in the gold standard kit is called cluster sampling. This one is all about being efficient, especially when your population is spread all over the place. Instead of trying to get a list of every single person in the country, you could randomly select a few cities, those are your clusters, and then just focus your research there. It saves a ton of time and money. And this breaks that down perfectly. Let's say you're doing a national study on unemployment. You're not going to list every household, no way. Instead, you do it in stages. You start big, randomly pick some provinces. Then you zoom in. Randomly pick some cities inside those provinces. And finally, you zoom in again. Randomly pick households within those cities. See? It's a smart, step-by-step way to get to a random sample. Okay, so the gold standard is awesome. But what happens when it's just not possible? What if you don't have a perfect list of everyone in the population? Or what if you're just really tight on time and money? Well, that's when researchers reach for the real-world toolkit, non-probability sampling. With these methods, the odds of any one person being chosen are totally unknown. The goal here might not be to get a perfect mini-me of the population. Sometimes you're just trying to explore a new idea or get a quick snapshot. You're basically trading some of that scientific perfection for something you can actually do. First step, we've got convenient sampling, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's the grab-and-go method. Think of a news reporter interviewing the first few people they bump into on the street. It's super fast, super easy, but there's a huge risk that your sample looks nothing like the general population. Now, a slightly smarter version of that is quota sampling. It looks a lot like the stratified sampling we talked about, but with one massive difference. It's not random. A researcher might decide, okay, I need 50 men and 50 women. They have those quotas to fill, but then they just use convenience. They talk to the first 50 men and 50 women they can find. It helps make sure different groups are included, but it's still not random. Then there's something called purposive sampling. Think of this as the expert pick method. Here, the researcher uses their own judgment to specifically choose people they think will have the best information. If you want to understand how big companies make decisions, you don't just ask random people on the street. You purposefully go find and talk to senior managers. Okay, this one's pretty cool. It's called Snowball sampling, and it's basically a networking tool. It's fantastic for finding people who are hard to reach or part of a hidden group. A researcher might find one person who has been through a specific experience and then ask that person if they know anyone else who would be willing to talk. The sample literally grows like a snowball rolling downhill. And last but not least, in our real-world toolkit, there's volunteer sampling. This is when people choose to take part themselves, like when you fill out one of those customer feedback surveys online. You got to be careful with this one, because the people who volunteer often have really strong opinions. They're either super happy or, more often, super angry. So their views might not be typical at all. So, to pull this all together, each one of these tools has a very specific job. Convenience is all about speed. Quota is about making sure you get the right mix of people, even if it's not random. Purposive lets you target experts. Snowball helps you find hidden groups. And volunteer works when people are eager to give their opinion. It's all about picking the right tool for the job you need to do. Okay, so why should you care about any of this? What's the big deal? Because now that you know about this toolkit, you can be a way smarter consumer of information. Think about it. We see polls, studies, and flashy headlines every single day, and pretty much all of them are built on a sample of some kind. So here is the number one thing I want you to take away. The next time you see a study or a poll, just pause for a second and ask yourself, how did they pick these people? Was it a random gold standard method, or was it something quick and easy, like a convenient sample that might be biased? Knowing that difference is absolutely everything. It tells you how seriously you should take the results, because the method matters a lot. And I'll leave you with this one last thought to chew on. From now on, the most powerful question you can ask isn't just who did they talk to, it's who didn't they talk to? Who got left out of that sample? Because asking that simple question, well, that changes everything. Thanks for tuning in.